So welcome everyone to the author talk today. We are happy to be joined by Mike Deeson, a former investigative reporter, and his new book is Bad News for You is Good News for Me. This was published by St. Petersburg Press in March 2020. What a time to have a book released. And it's in partnership with St. Petersburg Press, that Heritage Village is able to offer these kinds of author talks right straight from the author's mouth about the books that they're writing. So without further ado, welcome Mike Deeson.
Monica, I'm delighted to be here. I truly am. I'm thrilled the way the book came out, and more than happy to talk about it.
Great. Well, we'll just jump into the first question. And if I can get my slide to go, there we go. So in reading through the book, it became very evident, not only because you allude to this yourself, admittedly you say I'm a storyteller, but in the type of writing that you have, it becomes very clear that that's how you present your material. So can you talk a little bit about how you developed your writing style and how it maybe emerged as you were doing some of your journalism?
Certainly. To me, the best type of journalism is when the listener or the reader feels that you are talking directly to them. And that's how I tried to shape all of my stories as a reporter. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. When I used to go to work, I used to stop at a Circle K at the corner of Gandy and West Shore every morning and get a cup of coffee. And I became real good friends with the manager of the Circle K, who is an avid Channel 10 viewer. His name was Harry. He was about 15 years older than I was. And some mornings I would walk in and Harry would say to me, "Mike, that story you did last night was the best story I've ever seen you do," or whatever. And I would have thought to myself, that was just an okay story. And then some mornings I'd walk in thinking, man, the story last night, Harry's going to love. And I'd walk in and it would be crickets. So when I would be writing my stories, I would think of Harry. How would Harry, what would he understand what I'm saying here, what I'm not? And so I would write the stories for Harry. And then when I would record my audio track, I would think of Harry in my mind. Some broadcasters like to think they're giving a speech like at a convention to thousands of people and scream and all that. What I really made an effort to do was sound as if I was talking to one person. And it became, I was talking to Harry every time that I wrote my story and I recorded the track. So I try to make it as if I was just telling a story to someone who was a friend. And quite candidly, my book basically is a conglomeration of the speeches. I give a lot of speeches. Talking has never been a problem for me. And so basically, I just synthesized down my speeches, the stories that I love to tell. I do like to talk. And that's how I wrote the book. But I am first and foremost a storyteller, and I try to make investigative stories a story plus an investigation to expose someone doing something that they shouldn't have.
And well, first and foremost, so you owe your career to Harry.
That's right.
And my second follow-up question then is, it's not probably always roses trying to do investigative journalism. What was your goal, or what was the impetus behind exposing? That word is really saturated in investigative journalism, is exposing the truth.
Well, I would get personally offended by particularly government officials or public employees that tried to take advantage of the system. I think that elected officials should be serving as a public service, not to enrich themselves or to become famous. And if I found someone abusing the system, I would personally get offended by that and was driven to expose that. So I would get emotionally involved in a story. It just would irritate me when someone who is supposed to be serving the public would be taking advantage of their position to enrich themselves in one manner or another, or take advantage of people. And I felt a true obligation to let everybody know what was going on. So I was really driven. When I did a story, when I focused in on someone, when I heard most of my stories, I must say, I'd like to say they came because I'm extremely intelligent and good looking, which may be the case, but that's not where I got most of my stories. They came from tips. 99% of your stories come from tips. And when people would tell me something that was just egregious going on, and then I would do my research, because some of the tips were half truths and weren't what people purported them to be. But when I found out what they said was true, I would just be hell bent on exposing that. And I would put a lot of energy into exposing that.
Well, I'm so glad that there are people and journalists like you who, over the course of a career, several decades, were able to keep on the ball and expose corruption and graft and misdeeds. And that actually follows into my next question, because I think journalism, as we've known it in the past, is not going to be what it is in the future. And so, you touch on that a bit, on the future of news media and the future of journalism in the book. And so as a veteran of journalism, can you chat a bit about the news media, the new news media, the fall of newspapers, clickbait journalism, fake news propaganda, and how this might affect civic engagement with reality?
Well, it's ironic that you have a cell phone up there, because that really changes everything. For example, my grown kids and their friends do not watch and never will watch the 6 and 11 o'clock news. And the TV stations, this is going to be a long answer because there's a lot to this, but the TV stations are crazed about getting younger demographics, because that's what the time buyers want, the younger demographics. And to me, it's an effort in futility, because the younger demographics don't watch TV news over the air like we were accustomed to. And as a matter of fact, when I was at the station, and I mentioned this to every general manager that came through, and still contend, if I could run a station, my tagline would be, "We are the adult station." And if you want to find out the latest information about Taylor Swift's newest boyfriend, do not watch us, because you're not going to see it on our air. You're also not going to see murder after murder with crime tape. That's lazy journalism, because it fills 2 minutes with a reporter standing in front of crime tape telling you about a murder. The truth is, unfortunately, there's a murder every day or two in the Tampa Bay area. And except for the just egregious, outrageous crimes like the Schenecker killings, where she killed her 2 high school students, now that is one that you would have to report on. But most murders only affect the victim, the victim's family, the perp's family, and a 4-block radius. Well, we're a market of almost 4 million people. So when you do that story, you're just ignoring the majority of your viewers. And so it fills time, and it's easy. It's lazy journalism. So that's one area. I would try to do stories that are longer in length, that affect people, that I would cover more of the school board, because so many people have kids and grandchildren. I would cover things about taxes going up and millage rates. Most reporters today are young kids, nothing against them. I sound like an old fart, which I am, but they couldn't tell you what a millage rate is and how that affects people. So first off, I would do that. Secondly, there is a problem with so much journalism not being based on fact. Um, um, with the stories I did, every story that I did, every investigation, I would go out and research and then find the facts to be true, write it. Then it would go to our investigative unit producer who would look at it, check the facts, and maybe rewrite a little bit. Then our executive producer would get it. Then either our news director or assistant news director. And then when we all signed off on it, there would be a conference call with our corporate Washington attorney who would put me on the witness stand and ask me line by line what I had to back up what I was saying in the story, which is why, although we were sued several times because any idiot can file a lawsuit, every lawsuit that we had against the station and me was dismissed on a summary judgment because we fact checked everything that was said in the story. These days, again, I'm going to sound like an old fart. The kids either don't have the time or the inclination. I was a paperwork freak and had paperwork piled high on my desk. My desk looked like a fortress of paper, but I checked it all out. So sometimes the stories aren't fact checked as well, and then particularly on the national with the cable, opinion creeps in. I tried to make sure that my stories were not my opinion, but the facts. I'll give you an example. This goes back years ago when Chuck Robb was running for governor of Virginia. He won that race and then became senator from Virginia. And I personally really liked Chuck, and I voted for him. But I did a story one night, and he was in the Norfolk area, saw it on TV that night, and then I saw him the next day, and he came up to me and he said, "Mike, I thought you liked me." I knew he had been lieutenant governor, and so I'd covered. He said, "I thought you liked me," and I said, "Chuck, I do like you, and I'm probably going to vote for you." But what I reported on last night, it appeared from the facts, you misspoke or misstepped or whatever it was, and my job is not to build up the people I like or tear down the people I don't like. I let their actions speak for what they do. That doesn't always happen these days, and so I think that denigrates journalism to some degree. And then with the lack of people reading newspapers, again, because of the cell phone. I mean, I think it's so sad that the Tampa Bay Times just publishes a hard copy edition twice a week. I'm old school. I like the tactile feel of holding a newspaper. When I came to the Tampa Bay area, there were 5 dailies. There was the Tampa Tribune, the Tampa Times, the St. Petersburg Times, the Evening Independent, and the Clearwater Sun. We had 5 newspapers every day, and now we have a twice a week tactile newspaper that you can read, and that's happening across the country. We need newspapers, like the investigation that the Times just did about the Pasco Sheriff's Office and the Pasco County school systems. You need newspapers to expose that. You need investigative reporters to expose that, and TV stations are less likely to hire investigative reporters because they're more experienced, they're more expensive to hire than just a kid out of college, and they're not necessarily on the air every night because they're researching the stories. So journalism is going through a vast change, and I try to watch a variety. I watch MSNBC a lot, but I also force myself to watch Fox because you get 2 very different views on the same story, and somewhere the truth lies in the middle of that. So I have a concern for the veracity of journalism. I know there'll always be journalism, whether it's on the phone or in some other medium that we haven't even realized yet, but it's a cornerstone of our freedom. We've got to hold the politicians, particularly, and governmental agencies accountable. And without journalism, unfortunately, too many people will try to get around the system. It's a long answer to your question, but
That was a fantastic answer, and I'm hanging on every word. And I'm confident, and I'm optimistic as one of the younger parts of the younger generations, that those important pieces of information and the methodology that goes into creating those will come back. Because myself, I'll go on to my phone and there'll be a very interesting looking Tampa Bay Times article, and I can't get into it unless I subscribe to the online version. But Sunday morning is my time and my husband's time to drink our coffee and get the Tampa Bay Times. Well, I'm waiting, that it will be in there, but sometimes those articles are not in there. So I feel like I'm missing a portion of the news just because I simply didn't want any more clickbait and weird things coming onto my phone. 9 times out of 10, the clickbait, the title that you're baited into has nothing to do with what you just clicked into. So I think myself and a lot of other people are just simply over it and are willing to go back to the newspaper. I just love the article, case in point, those investigative reports that really expose problematic things in our area. The article about the battery plant, and
what a fantastic series that was.
It was really great.
It got action. Kathy Castor jumped in, Charlie Crist jumped in, and got OSHA off its butt to get in. Yeah, I mean, that's when journalism's at its best, when it gets some action and fixes a problem. Absolutely.
I mean, when you can read an article and go, what? That's happening in my backyard? No, right. That should not be happening. I mean, that's worth its weight in gold. And you're right. We are required to have an impartial media in order to be a good democracy. It's a cornerstone to that. And so if we don't have it, and it all becomes clickbait and fake news, or people cannot set themselves in reality, it's going to be a problem. But I like I said, I'm optimistic that the majority of people in America are wanting the real understanding of what happened, people who are unbiasedly looking into what happened. And as you said, I don't care if I'm your friend or not your friend. These are the facts, my friend. So.
That's right. That's true. But I want to say an important thing about fake news. Fake news is not news. It's not fake news just because the subject of the story doesn't like it. That's become just an easy phrase to use when someone doesn't like the story. They go, "Oh, that's fake news." Well, no. If bad news is not necessarily fake news, but they use that a lot to denigrate any story that they don't like, and that's unfair to do, and it's just not true.
Yeah, it's very confusing for younger people who are trying to navigate the world right now to understand basically their own ability to do the background research that they need to do to figure out what is true and what is false, to be good citizens. And I feel like it's imperative that we get back to a semblance of teaching younger people how they can make sense of the world. And one of them is good journalism.
Absolutely. And just because you see it on the internet or on Facebook or on Twitter doesn't make it true. I mean, that's a big problem too, because anybody can be a pseudo journalist on one of these social media platforms. And I can't help myself sometimes when I see this. I post and I try to show the facts and go, yeah, this is not true. I mean, there's a common one that's going around that says a person can serve in Congress one term and get paid his $176,000, I think is what they're making now, salary for the rest of his or her life. Absolutely false. The congressional elected officials now are in the same pension program as any other governmental employee. But that's just one of the falsehoods. And then I go, if I see that on Facebook with lots of other things, I go and get the law and I post it on there. I can't help myself. It drives me absolutely crazy. And then sometimes they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Or sometimes people say, oh, you're lying, you're making that up. I said, no, I'm quoting the law, man. You know, it's, I probably should just let it go, but I can't.
Well, Mike, if I hadn't followed you before, I will be following you now.
I'm on Facebook and Twitter.
Excellent. Well, getting into my next question, because we could go down this rabbit hole for a very long time, but you know, there are too many great stories in your book to talk about all of them. And I encourage anyone who's listening right now to go out and get Bad News for You is Good News for Me. But as you said, it's a great bathroom book, which that made me laugh, because you can kind of put it down and pick it back up again and find just amazing stories about what you've encountered over the course of your career. So can you think of the most memorable moment for you, one of your news stories, and maybe one or two or three, and talk a little bit about those that you reported on from the book? I'll just say one of them for me was the chapter "A Date with Death." I can't imagine meeting and interviewing people on death row, but I will leave it to you to tell me which were yours.
Okay, I will talk about that chapter. "A Date with Death" was a chapter about the executions that I was a witness in Florida. They have witnesses in most states. They do. In fact, there's a big controversy in Texas. They executed someone this week and didn't have any media witnesses. The reason they have media witnesses to report if anything went wrong with the execution, how it was handled and all. And I was a witness at executions in both the electric chair, which was really pretty macabre, and as well as lethal injection. The first man that I saw, and let me say this, every one of the executions that I was a witness at, there was no doubt that the person did the crime. So the first one was a guy by the name of Robert Dale Henderson, who went on a killing spree, killed his in-laws, killed his brother-in-law, who was 12 years old at the time, a horrible, horrible person. And the executions are in Stark, which is north of Gainesville. And I did not know what to expect. It was very bizarre. We went to the prison. The executions at that time were at 7 a.m, and we had to be there at 5 a.m. They then took us into the prison. We were in a conference room. They told us basically what would happen. And then we had to leave everything there. They gave us a pad of paper, a pencil, and for the first execution, you had to go through a metal detector. I had to take off my wedding ring. It was the only time in my life I took off my wedding ring, and I couldn't get it off. I had to use soap and water and get it off and all. So then they take you into the execution chamber, which is a room that had a row of maybe, I don't know, let's see, maybe 40 seats that were stacked back. And then there was a glass in front of you and the curtain was closed. A couple of minutes before 7 o'clock, and everybody's very silent, the curtain opens up and there is the electric chair staring you at the face. Old Sparky, it was called. And then the door opens in the back and guards bring the inmate who's about to be executed. They walk him in, and his head was shaved, and there was a gel on the top that looked almost like a Crest toothpaste to conduct the electricity. And that's when I sort of gasped, and I went, man, this is serious. This is serious. So then they take the inmate and walk him to the electric chair, sit him down, strap in his arms, strap in his legs, and then put the electrode on the top of his head and hold open a mask that is going to cover his face. The warden goes up to him and says, "Do you have any last words?" Henderson said something like, "No, sir, I don't." With that, they drop the mask. The warden goes to a phone that's open to the governor in case there's a last minute reprieve. And then he nods his head, the executioner, turns on the electricity, and I saw his hands grasp the side, and he sort of rose up, and I mean, it was very powerful. And then a doctor comes and examines him a couple of minutes later, nods his head, says, yes, he's dead. And then this is really bizarre. And it's irreverent, but I have to tell you, it happened at every execution. A bailiff comes and takes a microphone and says, the state of Florida has carried out its execution against Robert Dale Henderson on whatever the date was at every time, and then goes, please exit to the left. And each time they said that, and I got the impression it was almost like a Disney ride where the next group was going to come in and see the next execution. And there was like a souvenir store next door. I mean, that's horrible, but that's, reporters have a sixth sense of humor. But that happened at every execution, even the lethal injections. Perhaps one of the wildest was with Gerald Eugene Stano. And the reason for me it was wild is because I did an hour interview in the prison with Stano before his execution. He had come within 8 hours of being executed, and he got a stay from the Supreme Court. So we could not talk about any of the information of his crimes because it was under appeal at the time. But he talked about having his head shaved, having his final meal, and what he was feeling like, and all of that. It was a fascinating interview. But he kept saying throughout the whole interview, and they were going to execute an innocent man. They were going to execute an innocent man. So we finish the interview, and then we do what's called cutaways. That's when the photographer goes on the other side of the interview subject and gets shots of the reporter listening intently. It's edited together. It's rarely a two-camera shoot. And so we're doing the cutaways, and I said to him, Jerry, here is the deal. For the past hour, you have said they were going to execute an innocent man. I promise you, I will do one story a week till you are freed or till you are executed, if you can answer one question for me truthfully. And he said, sure, Mike, what do you want to know? And I said, well, if you were an innocent man, how did you lead the police to 30 of the 35 bodies of the women that they said that you murdered? His verbatim response to me was, Mike, that's a problem. And I said, yeah, Jerry, that is a big problem. Now, his attorney said he was a serial confessor, not a serial killer, and that he didn't do, but the evidence was just so overwhelming. So then to see him executed, and he also was in the electric chair. Henderson, when I saw him executed, seemed pretty resigned to the fact, did not have fear in his eyes or face. I mean, this was just a cold-blooded killer. Stano, who really, by the time I interviewed him, looked like a sort of a nerdy guy that you would not label as a serial killer. He looked more like an accountant than a serial killer to me. Not that accountants can't be killers, but you talk about Ted Bundy and all, but he had the fear of God in his, as he walked in. I mean, he knew exactly what was going on, and he just looked really, really scared. And the same thing with the execution, then exit to the left. Let me tell you one other execution. It was a lethal injection execution of a guy by the name of Newton Slauson. And why this is significant, he murdered his next door neighbors in Tampa one night, and I got called out to it. I didn't live too far from where the murders took place. Station called me, said, will you go out there and cover this? We'll send a photographer and meet you there. It was truly the bloodiest murder I think I've ever covered. In fact, one of the detectives, Ricky Childers, who was murdered years later, came to us. He was very good with reporters, and he said, guys, this is the bloodiest murder scene I've ever seen. Slauson had used a knife and killed his two neighbors, and also had cut the woman's stomach. She was pregnant, and killed It was horrible, just horrible. She crawled to her mother's house, which was behind there, and said Newton did it. So, and there was blood everywhere. It was horrible, 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 horrible. And so he was arrested, convicted, and you know the problem with murders. Spoiler alert: we're all going to die one day. So the victim dies once. It's so much harder on the family members who have to relive that murder. They may drive up on the scene and see the crime tape and the wails that people have as the police tell them their loved one has been murdered, or in the courtroom as they live it over and over. And that gave me nightmares more than being in an execution. So it was horrible. Slauson eventually fought any attempts to save his life. In fact, he was granted a stay by Jeb Bush right before he was executed for one day, and he was irritated. They wanted to evaluate one more time whether he was mentally capable or not, and he was actually irritated that they postponed it. But so we were in Stark, I think, for 2 days, but whatever. And let me say, the finest hotel in Stark is the worst hotel you've ever stayed in July. It was not exactly and the liquor stores closed very early, which also irritated me because but that's besides.
Well, journalists aren't necessarily known for their sobriety, so yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, okay, let me go as an aside. When I was in Norfolk, I learned an important lesson about sobriety. I was a political reporter and covered the General Assembly in Richmond. And the reporters stayed at the same hotel that many of the Norfolk delegations stayed at, the Holiday Inn downtown. And I would always wear a sport coat in the bar, and we'd be drinking all together. And I'd keep a reporter's notebook inside my blazer, and you know, with liquor flowing, they would tell me all sorts of things. I'd run to the men's room and write it in my notebook so I would remember, and then a week or two later I would quiz them, some of the same people who told it to me, about something that they told me. They go, how did you know that? That's supposed to be a secret. And I want to say, yeah, you were feeling no pain when you told me that stuff. So yes, that you get a lot more at a bar than you do in a dry committee hearing.
That's hilarious.
But anyway,
it's the best truth serum out there.
Absolutely. And I would have to write it down because I wouldn't remember. I'd be drinking pretty good with them as well. But getting back to Slauson, so it was the most horrendous murder I think I've ever covered. And then the curtain opens up and he's attached to a gurney, and it was just so sterile. And again, they asked him if they wanted last words or anything, and no. And then they just and the warden's on the phone, and then he nods yes, and they put the cocktail mixture in, and he went to sleep. And it just didn't seem as if the death was as horrendous as the crime scene. And then of course at the end, after the doctor pronounced him dead, the bailiff said, and please exit to the left. It was just I got that
the next ride.
Yeah, but yeah, so that was the you know, here's the I'll tell you one other thing about it that was in the book. When I was in Virginia reinstated the death penalty. They have just recently, the governor signed an order that stops the death penalty in Virginia. But we did a story about the starting of the death penalty again. And we did what was called a point of view shot. In Virginia, they used to have 6 cells adjacent to the death chamber for the next 6 guys that were going to be executed. And in a really bizarre move, I thought, they would move everybody down one cell till they were into cell number 1. Yeah, it was really weird. And so we did a point of view shot, as it's called, where the photographer walked from cell 1 and the door opens and he walks into the death chamber and then sits in the electric chair, which is just a wooden chair, and then takes the camera and shoots out into the witness room. So he does that. And I said to the warden, who was really nice, and let us shoot everything except that the headpiece with the sponge on it that conducted the electricity. I said, you know, I'm hoping this is going to be my only chance. Can I sit in the electric chair? And he said, well, sure. I mean, it's just a teacher's chair. You know, they would attach they didn't have them there. So I sat in the Virginia electric chair, Yeah,
Was that creepy or what?
Yeah, it was eerie. I must admit that was very eerie. But here's the deal. As a reporter, part of the thing that I am blessed with is that I get to see things firsthand that people only vicariously live through me. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to see things firsthand that otherwise I wouldn't have. It's, I almost feel like being a reporter is like a historian. You are living history and chronicling it. And so that's what I thought of, and that's why seeing the executions I thought was an important part, because it's a part of our society, and that you have to report upon that. So that was one of my favorites. Another one of my favorites was not an investigative piece, because I did a lot of politics too, but it was a political piece when I was covering the election. Jebb's second term in Florida is before you were here, Monica, but he ran against a Democrat named Bill McBride, who was the managing partner of Holland Knight, one of the largest law firms in the state. Bill was just a wonderful guy who was a former Marine, a bull of a man, just a strong guy. And I love Bill, but he was a terrible candidate, just a horrible candidate. And he got crushed by Jeb. But the last week of the campaign, I flew around the state covering McBride in every one of his appearances. Another one of my friends at the station was with Jeb at the time. So as we're flying around in these small little airplanes, I think we got into West Palm. Everything looks the same after a while, and you hear the same speech over and over again. So we fly into West Palm in a small airplane. First thing I do when I get off a small airplane is run to the bathroom, because they don't have bathrooms. So I think it was West Palm, and I go to the bathroom, and I start to push the door open. The door swings open, and it's Bill Clinton on the other side. Well, you don't expect to see that. And I went, "Mr. President," and he goes, "Come right in. There's plenty of room." So Clinton was spending the last couple of days of the campaign talking for McBride. He was no longer president. Well, it was cool. We still got the presidential motorcade every place we went. And then we went from West Palm, I think, to South Florida's Dade Community College. And then we took a motorcade to South Beach, where there was going to be another speech. And they stopped traffic. It was very cool. And I'm on the press box. And we stopped in South Beach in front of a Starbucks. And nobody knows what's going on. And so they nominated me, because I'm a loudmouth, to find out what's going on. I stuck my head out. I said, "Well, what's the deal?" And Clinton goes, "Well, we're a little early. I thought I'd buy the traveling media some coffee." And with that, the Secret Service storms the Starbucks. They saw the Secret Service, and they said, "It's clear." We all go in, and I was first up, and Clinton goes, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, just coffee." And he gets it to me, goes, "I'm paying." And he gives it to me, says, "Cream and sugar in the back." I said, "No, I drink it black, Mr. President." So then we're outside, and we're standing in a circle, and it's Clinton and me, Bill Nelson, who was the senator at the time. He was the junior senator from Florida, and then another reporter, another photographer, the photographer I was working with, and then Chris Tucker, the actor who was in all the Jackie Chan movies.
Yeah.
He and Clinton had become really good friends. In fact, Clinton had toured Africa with Chris Tucker, and he said that's when he realized he was no longer president. He said, because all the African people were saying, "Who's that old gray-haired guy with Bill Clinton?" I mean, with Chris Tucker, rather. He let out a laugh. Well, anyway, so I started playing reporter, as I always do, and started asking Clinton questions. And he goes, "Hey, you know all about me. I want to know about you." And he started asking me questions about, what kind of stories did I like to cover? And I told him I was an investigative reporter. And he asked about local investigations as opposed to national. He asked about, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 questions. And then he went around the circle and did that with everybody. Now, it's been a full 15 minutes since I have said a word to Bill Clinton. And he turns to me and he goes, "Mike," used my name, which meant that he was paying attention. And then he said, "You said something earlier I want clarification on." and asked me another question. It was honestly the best life lesson I ever had, because I said, if the former president of the United States can, one, remember my name, and two, pay attention to what I'm saying, shame on me if I don't pay attention to what someone's saying. And so when I meet someone and I shake their hand, I say their name out loud. And I'm not sure what it is, I'll say, can you say it again? I want to know your name. And when they're talking, I intently listen. Now, you probably had incidences where you've been with people where you're talking and they're looking, who else can they look down the line or impress? I vowed I would never, ever do that. And I learned that lesson from Bill Clinton. And that's why the Clinton charm, everybody who's met him said he is like that. 15 minutes later, he would probably forgot who I was. But in those 15 minutes, he was totally engaged. And it was a great life lesson.
It's a great life lesson. My first thought is it's also a great deflection strategy.
Yeah.
You tell me about you instead.
Well, it's true. That's a great way to, people like to talk about themselves. That was also a good life lesson. That's a way you can make friends with people, and remember, there is an attorney in Tampa. I mentioned it in the book. His name is Ron Weaver. He's a Harvard graduate. He's really bright. Well, when you tell Ron something, he never forgets it. When you see Ron, he will ask you a question about your wife, and sometimes he remembers my wife's name. He's met her a couple of times, or about your kids, your grandkids. Everybody loves him.
That is a gift. That is truly a gift.
It's truly a gift. So that was a good life lesson. Let me tell you one of my favorite stories. I mean, there's so many, but it was an investigation I did about. We have 10 million specialty license plates in Florida. That's an exaggeration. I can't remember exactly how many, but one of them, what happens is the charities that run it, the schools get some money if it's Florida or FSU or USF or whatever, they get, because you pay extra for the specialty plates. Well, the charities raise money by doing that as well. There was a charity called In God We Trust. You've probably seen the license plates. And the premise of the charity is that they were going to give the money that they collected to the widows or widowers and the children of fallen firefighters and police officers. Well, I got a tip from a friend of mine that there was a widow of a firefighter who had died in a crash. His truck had turned over, he broke his neck and died. And his home was being foreclosed upon. And she turned to the charity and said, look, I need some help on this. And I understand you have this charity. And they told her to pound sand. They had collected at the time, as I recall, through IRS records, because I was a crazy researcher, so I had all the paperwork. I think they had collected $466,000 through the license plates and had given out less than $10,000, and had paid the president and the vice president of the charity much more money than they had given out. Well, I got immediately offended. It was just horrible. And then I interviewed the widow. It was such a tragic story. So I called the guy who was head of the charity and said, I want to talk to you. I'm doing a story. And I'm never like, oh, this is going to be a nice story. I always say it's a bad story. Here's what I've got. Here's what I want to do. I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about it and defend yourself if you can. And he said, I have no comment. My standard line with no comment was, you have the right to say no comment, but you have to say that on camera. And you can't say it's an ambush interview, because I'll even tell you where I'm going to be. I'm going to come to your house. I'm going to come to your office, but I'm going to ask you on camera what happened to the money. And he said, well, try if you can. He was pretty, and then he hung up on me. Well, he lived in Windermere, outside of Orlando, a very upscale neighborhood where Tiger Woods lives, Shaq O'Neal lives there. And we went over there. Well, first we went to what they listed as the headquarters of the charity. And it turned out to be a UPS post office box. That was the headquarters. But I was able to get his address, because Florida has the broadest public records laws in the state, and all real estate transactions are listed at the property appraiser's office. So we went over to his house, and I was concerned that it was going to be a gated community, because I say it's an upscale community. And his house was a huge house that had a big gate, but the gate was open and there were no trespassing signs. So we parked the car, the photographer and I walked in, and I knocked on the door and nobody answers. So we thought, well, he's out. It doesn't say no trespassing. He's going to have to drive back in and we'll get him then. So we're waiting there. It was unbelievably hot Florida summer day, as it can be here. And then all of a sudden, the door starts to open. The photographer says, Mike, the door's opening. We go rushing up, and out comes this drop dead gorgeous woman in a bikini. And I just assumed it was his wife. And I asked her, she said, no, I'm not his wife. You must be looking for the guy who we were going after. And I said, well, we are. And she said, we just bought the house from him, and he screwed us over, but I think I know where he lives. I'll help you. And she said, come on in. Now, I have to also tell you that in addition to the bikini and all, which got my attention, what got more of my attention was she had a pet pig, and the pig came out and started sniffing me, and I was distracted by the pig. Turned out she was a swim instructor and was waiting for another student to come there. But we came in, and she called a friend of hers who lived around the corner from where this guy had moved to. And she said, I'll go over there, get you the exact address. And she called back, and we went over there. So we drive over to the new place, knock on the door, and no answer. So we're sitting in the van now, and we're waiting and waiting. Let me say this: I hate stakeouts. You spend inordinate hours unless you get the target on camera. Then those 10 seconds are worth all the time that you have sat there at the stakeout. But anyway, so we're sitting there, and he comes out to meet his pool guy. So we go up, and his name was Daryl, and I went, Daryl, where's the money? I introduced myself, and he said, I told you I don't want to talk about that. And I said, where's the money? And he's going, and then he starts rushing the camera to try to break the camera. Now, the TV station always tells us that the reporter's first job is not to worry about his own safety, but to keep the camera from getting broken. Right. So we get into a wrestling match where he has the camera, the photographer, he's trying to throw it down on the ground, and I'm trying to pull him, and we're wrestling on his front lawn with the camera and everything. Now, I've got to tell you, as soon as that started, I was thrilled, because I said that this has turned a B+ story into an A+. It's going to win an Emmy. It's going to win an Emmy, which it did. I knew that. So this is what I'm thinking. I'm totally honest, and this is happening. I was just delighted. So finally, we got the camera back. We left. We go into the truck, and the photographer that I work with was a wonderful photographer. And you can play back the video. We didn't know when we knew at one point the camera stopped as it hit the ground. We didn't know what we had, but we had enough that was good. But I turned to him and I said, Paul, you shot everything out of focus. How can that be? You always are great. And he looked at me and he said, dummy, your glasses came off in the wrestling match. It's in focus. So then I had to go back onto the lawn, get my glass. He comes out and said, I thought I told you to leave. I said, I'm looking for my glasses. He said, fine, I got my glasses. We called the Windermere police. And remember, it's a small community. And they sent out 5 patrol cars, some that had 2 police. I think they sent the whole department out. I was expecting Barney Fife to be there with his 1 bullet in his shirt pocket, putting it in and to go after the guy. And we showed them the video. They went up and talked to him. They charged him with battery and all. And he didn't go to jail. I mean, it was a first offense. He had to do community service, but I insisted that he write an apology letter to me, and which he did. And then he had to pay for the damage. He did more than $900 worth of damage to the camera. And then a crazy thing happened is as 2 or 3 months later, he called and apologized again and said, I got crazy. I shouldn't have. The state took over the charity, and charges were supposed to be filed by the IRS. That never happened. I don't know how that dropped the ball, but that was one of my favorite stories because the charity ended, and they actually gave the money to the widows and widowers of firefighters. So we accomplished.
All you had to do was get in a fight on the front lawn to get her money.
That's right. Oh, let me tell you about another encounter where I got a black eye in a story and couldn't use it. I was so disappointed. I was doing a story about OSHA. There had been some slackers in the Tampa OSHA office, and I got a hold of an internal report naming the slackers. I had a source in the office who gave it to me because he was irritated. They were going to cover it up and not let people know about it. So I had all the information, and then I had to get pictures of the slackers to go with the story. It's TV, you have to have video with it. So we hung out in the public parking garage that OSHA parked in. And what we did is every time someone pulled into an OSHA designated parking space, we would take their picture. We were not surreptitious about it. And then I would have my source match the slackers to the report. Well, some guy pulls into an OSHA parking space. He gets out of his car and he says, you better not be taking my picture. And I said, look, it's a public parking spot, and parking garage. We have every right to be here. And he says, you bet. And he's getting closer and closer. And then he takes his briefcase and swings it to break the lens of the camera. Well, being the good soldier I was, I knew that my job was to protect the camera. And I jumped right in front of the camera, got hit right in the eye with the briefcase, got a shiner. And again, I went, oh boy, this is going to be great for the story. I can't wait to use this piece. Well, it turned out the guy was an undercover DEA agent. And had he told me that, I wouldn't want to expose him. Right. But the reason he didn't tell me was because he had been disciplined before a couple of times for parking in the OSHA spaces, which were closer to the elevator than the DEA spaces. And he didn't want his bosses to know that he was parking in the OSHA spaces. So it had no...
Who told anyone that either?
Right. So it had no relevance to the story, so I couldn't use it. Oh my
God.
So what I did, I called the U.S. attorney at the time, Robert Merkel, who was a crazed person. And I said, listen, Bob, you got to get this guy to apologize to me. He said, I don't know that he's going to do that. I said, well, here is the deal. I have an assault on camera. If he doesn't apologize by the close of business today, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'm going to the state attorney's office, and this guy will be prosecuted and probably use his job. He said, well, I'll call him 2 minutes to 5. I get the call. It was not the most heartfelt apology, but he did apologize. But I got a black eye and I couldn't use it in the story. I was really disappointed.
Well, Mike, it sounds like you've always been feisty, and it sounds like you have to be as a journalist. So my last question, I think there'll probably be some questions from our listeners because you have great stories, and yes, you are definitely a storyteller. But my next and last question is, what's next for you? I can't imagine that you've slowed down any. Are you working on other projects we can anticipate coming out in the future?
Yeah, when I retired, I started an investigative documentary company, and I've done some documentaries. I did one about Florida's alimony laws. Florida is one of the few states in the country that has lifetime alimony. And I had some real horror stories. There was a doctor who had Alzheimer's and could not practice anymore, but still was having to pay alimony till the day he died. I mean, and a significant amount of alimony. There was a woman who was a dentist whose husband physically beat her, and because her income was higher, she was paying alimony to her abuser. So I did that documentary.
Oh, wow.
I spent 2 years doing a documentary about elephants being abused in circuses. That's not done yet. We're doing some final editing on that thing, but I traveled the country. People think because Ringling shut down that there are no more elephants in circuses, but there are some small circuses. They're treated horribly. To train them, they beat the hell out of them with bull hooks and shock devices. We had all sorts of undercover video. I didn't shoot that, but I interviewed some of the people that did. And they're also chained up 19 hours a day. I went to Africa. Elephants roam miles each day, but
They're very social creatures.
Very social. So that's a disturbing documentary. And the one I think I am going to work on next, and actually Zoom makes it very possible, is a documentary that's theoretically titled "Can't Convict a Cop." Even though there was a conviction of Chauvin in Minneapolis, I have a database of every police shooting since 2015.
Oh, wow.
And whether there's video of it. So what I'm doing is making public records requests of the videos from the police departments. And then because of Zoom and people accept that, I initially thought, well, man, I'm going to have to get some group there was a group that hired me to do the elephant documentary, that I'm going to have to find a group that will pay for the travel and all that. But now through Zoom, it basically is just sweat equity, tracking the people down and doing Zoom interview of the surviving family members and all of that. So I think that's going to be my next project.
Well,
I suck at retirement. Plus, I do a radio show, and then I'm promoting the book, and I give a lot of speeches. I've got a speech next week, and I'm also, this is pretty cool. I'm doing a thing next week with Barry Williams, who played Greg, the oldest brother on the Brady Bunch for MeTV here in Tampa Bay. They run the Brady Bunch. Who knew? And so I'm doing a piece with him next week on their Facebook page. So that should be pretty cool. So yeah, I keep busy. I can't slow down, I'm afraid.
Where can people listen to your radio show?
It's on WMNF on noon on Sundays. And that's where that is. And let me, if I may, plug, the book is available on Amazon, and it's also available on Audible. I recorded the book, which was really a bear to do. It was really tough. It's 8.5 hours long, but it's me just sort of telling the stories in the book. I mean, reading it, but trying to sound like I'm just telling the stories in the book. So that's where they're available.
I want to thank you for plugging, because I was going to do that, but you're just so on point. Like, you do all these things yourself, so I don't have to. But yeah, I wanted to open it up to anybody who is listening right now. If you'd like to ask Mike a question, you can put it in the Q&A box or in the chat box. And I'm sure Mike will be very happy to answer your question. But like I said before, it's just so amazing to get to speak with you, and I'm so happy that you were able to do this. We do here at Heritage Village a Speaking of History series every year as well. So I think I might be reaching out to you again to maybe see if you'd want to do one of those and talk more about your documentaries. And
I would be delighted. And let me say one other thing that you mentioned before. You talked about how tenacious I am, and I am when I do the stories. But away from being a reporter in real life, I am the most laid back person. My kids used to laugh at me when my wife was the disciplinarian. My friends, when they would see me on TV, they would go, "Who is that guy on TV?" I am just very mellow and easygoing and all that. But when I get personally offended, I go after those people.
Well, thank goodness there are people like you who just won't lay down and take it, because I know I get home at the end of the day and I'm like, What should I do about that, though? You know, what should I do? I think a lot of people find themselves in that situation where they see something happening and they're like, but I just don't know where to start. So this has been so great. I don't see any questions coming through, but I thank you so much, Mike. I think you probably answered all their questions. And again, like Mike said, if you would like to purchase Bad News for You is Good News for Me by Mike Deeson, then you can find that on Amazon, Audible, or you can go to St. Petersburg Press and they certainly will have a copy for you as well. And thank you again, Mike. This has been a pleasure.
Monica, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.